Arab executive yells at African waitress. She responds with a move that stuns everyone. The entire restaurant went silent. Moments before, the chatter had been lively, the glasses clinking, the string quartet playing softly in the corner. But then he shouted. Zayd al-Hakim, one of the most feared and powerful billionaires in the Middle East, had stood up from his table and pointed at the young African waitress as if she were invisible, disposable. No one had ever dared speak back to him. No one had ever dared hold his gaze until she did. Her hand trembled for a split second. Then she did something no one in the room expected, something that stopped the entire world and changed his life forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. Now, follow this incredible true-to-life story of pride, power, and the unexpected strength of one woman who refused to be humiliated, and the Arab billionaire whose heart would never be the same again. Zayd al-Hakim had never waited for anything in his life. Not for flights, not for meetings, not for people, and certainly not for food. He sat at the corner table of Le Palais, the most exclusive restaurant in Nairobi, where the crystal glasses shimmered like ice and the menu had no prices. The air was perfumed with saffron, truffle, and whispered money. His tailored white thobe was pristine, his wristwatch more valuable than the chandelier above him. Across from him sat his lawyer, an older man from Doha, speaking softly about an acquisition deal in South Sudan. Zayd wasn't listening. He was watching the waitress. She was late. He'd already asked for still water, lemon wedge, no ice. Twice. The third time, she simply nodded with her eyes down, turned away, and didn't return. That was 5 minutes ago. Now, as the fourth minute passed, something in Zayd snapped. The last weeks had been pressure stacked upon pressure. His father's death, the family council clawing for control, his brothers smiling while sharpening knives behind their backs. He hadn't slept in 2 nights, and this trip to Nairobi, originally meant to close a mining deal, had devolved into political hand-holding and diplomatic dinners. He needed control, precision, efficiency, not a waitress who couldn't follow a simple request. So when she returned, a tray in hand, footsteps graceful but too slow for his taste, he rose. The silverware clinked loudly as his chair pushed back. Conversations at neighboring tables fell quiet. Only the soft music continued. He pointed directly at her. You think I don't exist? He barked. She froze. I asked you 3 times. 3. And still, I sit here like a fool while you what? Take a stroll in the kitchen? Her fingers tightened around the tray. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared at him, not with fear, but with something else, something unreadable. Her name was Abiba. She was 23, tall, slender, with high cheekbones and skin the color of roasted chestnut. Her uniform, crisp white shirt, black apron, was clean but faded. A small burn mark peeked from beneath her collar. Her eyes were dark and wide, but steady, too steady. Zayd noticed it now. That calm, that deliberate stillness. She set the tray on the table with care and spoke. Finally, her voice was soft, clear. Would you like the lemon wedge before or after I clean the glass you just spat on? The entire restaurant went dead silent. Someone at the bar gasped. A spoon dropped. Even Zayd's lawyer leaned back, blinking in disbelief. Zayd stared at her. The air crackled. Something about her voice, its confidence, its razor-edge elegance, sliced through the storm inside him. He wasn't used to being talked back to, especially not like that. Especially not by someone so small, so seemingly powerless. But in this moment, she wasn't small at all. She was immovable, unshakable, a statue made of flame. Zayd opened his mouth, ready to retaliate, but nothing came out, because deep down, somewhere behind his bruised pride, something unexpected stirred. Shame. And more than that, curiosity. Who was she? He sat down slowly, without another word. Abiba picked up the dirty glass, turned, and walked back toward the kitchen. As soon as the door closed behind her, the murmurs started. One couple whispered, "She's going to be fired." Another said, "Did you see her eyes?" The manager appeared seconds later, sweat already on his brow, hurrying toward Zaid's table like a man begging for forgiveness. "Sir, I'm terribly sorry," he began. "She's new. She doesn't understand." Zaid raised his hand. The manager froze. "I want her back at my table," Zaid said calmly. "Excuse me?" I said. He repeated slower, "I want that waitress, Abiba, back at my table. Now." The manager hesitated, but she spoke out of turn. She said exactly what she needed to say. "Zaid, cut in. Now go." The manager bowed low and hurried off. Zaid's lawyer leaned forward, whispering, "You sure about this? It's a bit." But Zaid wasn't listening anymore. He was watching the kitchen door, waiting, wondering, because for the first time in years, someone had looked at him, not with fear, not with calculation, not with flattery, but with something terrifyingly pure, dignity, and it unsettled him, not because she was defiant, but because she was right. Zaid unfolded the letter slowly, his breath controlled, his movements deliberate. He hadn't felt this level of curiosity since he was 17, when he first read the confidential files from his father's oil empire. But this wasn't dossier. This wasn't negotiation. This was a handwritten letter from a waitress. His eyes scanned the first line. "If you're reading this, it means I surprised you. And that's the first time anyone in your position has ever looked me in the eyes long enough to be surprised." He looked up at Abiba. She was standing tall beside the table, hand behind her back, posture straight, not a hint of fear, not a trace of arrogance, just presence. Zaid's eyes returned to the page. "You shouted at me in front of strangers. You belittled me. And yes, I answered back. Not because I wanted attention, not because I'm brave, but because I've spent most of my life invisible, and I made a promise to myself that no man would ever make me feel invisible again." His throat tightened. The letter continued, her words bleeding through the paper with aching clarity. "I am the daughter of a teacher who died educating children in a war zone, and a mother who walked 5 kilometers every day just to keep my sister and me fed. I didn't grow up with silk or servants. I grew up with dust, with water carried in tin buckets, and with stories told by candlelight. And I worked for every book I've ever read, every uniform I've ever worn, and every tip I've ever earned." Zaid swallowed. "So, when you yelled at me, you weren't just yelling at a waitress. You were yelling at someone who has already seen worse, who has endured more than your voice could ever intimidate." And I answered not with disrespect, but with reminder that people like me exist, that you don't own the air we breathe. The words were clear, beautiful, brutal, not written to hurt, but written to be heard. Zaid folded the letter, his fingers motionless for a long moment. He didn't look up right away. Instead, he sat with the truth of it, the discomfort, the crack forming in his carefully polished world. When he finally raised his head, Abiba was still standing there, silent, waiting. Zaid leaned back in his chair and spoke, his voice lower than before. "You're educated." Abiba tilted her head slightly. "Is that surprising?" "No. It's rare to see someone so articulate in such a raw way. I've had practice." He gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit." She didn't move. "I'm still on shift." "I'm asking," he said, "not ordering." Abiba paused. Then, carefully, she pulled out the chair across from him and sat. Her hands remained folded in her lap. Her eyes didn't challenge him, but they didn't retreat either. "Why write a letter?" Zaid asked. "Because I've learned that when you speak to powerful men in public, they don't hear you. But when they read alone with no eyes watching, they sometimes listen." Zaid exhaled through his nose. "You think I needed to be humbled." "I think you needed to see someone you couldn't dismiss," she said simply. Zaid's lips twitched, a hint of something close to a smile. "No one's spoken to me like that since my mother," he murmured. Abiba said nothing. For a long moment, the sound of the restaurant filled the silence between them. Clinking glass, distant conversation, the subtle hum of a piano. Finally, Zaid leaned forward. "What do you want?" Abiba looked confused. "Excuse me?" "Everyone wants something." especially those who hand a letter to a billionaire in a restaurant. So what is it? Money? A job offer? Sponsorship? Abiba's face stayed calm, but her eyes darkened. I want to be treated like a person. Zaid blinked. That's all. Yes, she said. And I want you to understand that your power doesn't give you permission to wound people. Not anymore. Zaid sat back, folding his arms across his chest. You do know who I am. I do. And you're not afraid? No, she said, because I didn't insult you. I reminded you that arrogance is a choice, and so is dignity. Zaid nodded slowly. There was no manipulation in her tone, no performance, just the unwavering clarity of someone who had lived truth far longer than he had lived luxury. I have hundreds of people working under me, he said after a pause, and none of them would ever speak to me the way you just did. Maybe they should, she replied. He studied her for a moment longer, then reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a business card. I'm leaving Nairobi tomorrow, he said, placing the card on the table between them. If you ever want a position beyond this place, call me. My team can arrange relocation, sponsorship, education. Abiba glanced at the card but didn't touch it. Why? Because I haven't stopped thinking about your letter since I read the first line, he said. Because it said more in a page than I've heard in boardrooms all year. And because I want someone like you near me. She raised an eyebrow. Near you? As a mind, he clarified. Not a servant. I already have a life, she said. I'm not here to change it, Zaid said. I'm offering you the door. You decide whether to walk through it. Abiba looked at him for a long time, then stood. She didn't take the card, but she looked him in the eyes again and nodded once. That, she said, is how you offer dignity. And then she turned and walked away. Zaid didn't stop her. He didn't call after her. He just sat at the table, alone with the untouched business card, the folded letter in his hand, and the quiet realization that something inside him had shifted. For the first time in his life, he hadn't won the conversation. He had received a gift, one he hadn't asked for, one he didn't yet understand, but one he would never forget. Zaid al-Hakim didn't sleep that night. The hotel suite was silent, wrapped in luxury. Silk curtains drifting a breeze, soft gold lamplight against marble walls, the faint hum of the city below. But his mind refused peace. It circled back again and again to her voice, her letter, her eyes. He had been humiliated. Yes, but not out of disrespect. He had been awakened. That was the word that kept surfacing. Awakened to something he hadn't realized he'd been missing. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about guilt. It was about realness. So many people in his orbit were like soft shadows, bending around him, agreeing before he even spoke. Abiba had done the opposite. She stood in full light. She mirrored him, not in wealth or stature, but in certainty, and it shook something loose in him. The next morning, Zaid canceled all meetings. The mining deal could wait. The boardroom could wait. For once in his life, he could wait. He picked up the business card from the night before, still untouched on the hotel desk, and turned it over. Then, without knowing exactly why, he dialed his private assistant. Find her, he said simply. A pause. Sir, the waitress from last night, Abiba, from Le Palais. I want to know who she is, where she lives, where she studied, everything. There was hesitation. Of course, sir. Zaid hung up and stood by the window, arms crossed behind his back. He stared down at the city, chaotic, alive. The Nairobi skyline wasn't as tall as Doha's, or as pristine as Dubai's, but it breathed. It felt real, much like her. By early afternoon, a full report came in. Her full name, Abiba Maron, born in Bahir Dar, Ethiopia, migrated with her mother and younger sister after her father was killed during political unrest, worked 3 jobs to finish secondary school, took night classes in literature, applied for a university scholarship abroad but was denied due to documentation issues, started working at Le Palais 2 months ago. Zaid read it twice, then closed the file. He didn't know what he had expected. A hidden agenda? A carefully constructed facade? But it was exactly what she had said, a woman who had clawed her way out of the dust and refused to bow. It disturbed him, how deeply it moved him. Later that evening, Zaid returned to Le Palais, not in his usual fleet of black SUVs, not with assistants or security. He wore jeans, a clean linen shirt, a simple watch. No rings, no perfume of wealth. The manager nearly choked when he saw him. "Sir, welcome back. We had no idea." "I'm not here for a meal," Zaid interrupted. "Is Abiba working?" The man hesitated. "She is, but after yesterday, she requested to be moved to the kitchen." Zaid felt something sink in his chest. "She's still here?" "Yes, sir. She's plating dishes." Zaid nodded. "Tell her I'm outside. I'll wait as long as it takes." The manager blinked. "Would you like me to bring her?" "No. Just tell her. That's all." Zaid walked outside and sat on the stone ledge beneath the restaurant's lanterns. He watched the Nairobi street, the flow of life, children running barefoot, vendors closing up carts, music drifting from a shop window. And for once, he wasn't separate from it. He was in it. He was there. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Then he heard the soft crunch of shoes behind him. He didn't turn right away. "I didn't expect you," Abiba's voice said. Zaid smiled faintly, still looking ahead. "Neither did I." She stepped beside him. Not close, not far, just near enough that he could sense her presence. "I came because I want to say something," he began. "I'm not accepting a job," she said quickly. He looked at her then. "This isn't about a job." She crossed her arms. "Then what?" "I wanted to thank you." Abiba frowned, unsure whether to believe him. "For what?" she asked. "For reminding me of something I forgot." Zaid said, "Of what it feels like to be spoken to honestly, without fear, without politeness masquerading as loyalty." Abiba watched him carefully. He continued, "When I was young, my mother used to tell me that true leadership starts when people stop agreeing with you. I didn't understand it until you stood in front of me." Abiba looked down, brushing a curl away from her face. "I wasn't trying to teach you anything," she said. "I was trying to protect my dignity." "And you did," Zaid said, "beautifully." They stood there a while in silence. Then she asked, "Why me?" "What do you mean?" "You could have had 1,000 more powerful conversations with professors, CEOs, activists. Why this one?" Zaid thought for a moment, then answered quietly, "Because your strength didn't come from wealth, or education, or position. It came from being unseen and deciding not to disappear. I don't have that strength. Not like you." Abiba looked away, her expression unreadable. He stood then, slowly, careful not to dominate the space. "I'll leave now," he said. "You don't owe me anything. But I needed you to know you changed something in me." She looked up at him. "People say things like that when they feel embarrassed. It fades." "Maybe," Zaid said, "but I don't want it to." He reached into his pocket again and offered the same business card. But this time, he held it loosely, not placing it between them like a contract, just an offering. "If one day you change your mind, if you want to study, work, start something of your own, I will help. No expectations, no repayment. Just say the word." Abiba took a long breath. This time, she accepted the card, not as submission, not as agreement, but as a recognition of her own value. "I'll think about it," she said. Zaid smiled. "That's more than I hoped for." He turned and began to walk away. But before he reached the corner, she called after him, "Zaid." He turned. "I meant what I wrote," she said. "I know," he replied. And for the first time in a very long time, Zaid al-Hakim felt seen, not for what he owned, not for what he controlled, but for what he still had the potential to become. The private jet sliced through the sky, leaving behind the soft haze of Nairobi's twilight. Zaid sat alone, legs crossed, eyes on the window. The world beneath him looked silent, small, far away, but in his chest, everything was loud. He had made millions of decisions in the air before, acquisitions, firings, declarations, but none of them felt as weighty as the quiet, invisible decision growing inside him now. He couldn't stop thinking about her, not in a romantic sense, though he couldn't deny her beauty. No, it was something deeper, something elemental, a question she had planted in his soul without ever asking aloud. Who are you when no one fears you? That was the unspoken challenge her presence had ignited. For years, Zayd had worn his wealth like armor. His reputation, his voice, even his silence had been cultivated to ensure he was never ignored, never contradicted, never exposed. But Abiba hadn't just contradicted him. She had seen through him. And still, she had answered with grace, not venom. That was what disarmed him most. She had every right to humiliate him, and yet she offered him dignity. The very thing he had denied her, that kind of restraint, that power, it came from a life no privilege could mimic. Back in Doha, the city welcomed him like a loyal subject. His return was discreet but noted. Security officers saluted. Drivers opened doors. Advisors awaited orders. Everything resumed with seamless precision. But Zayd was no longer synchronized with that world. Not entirely. He noticed things he used to dismiss. The way staff stood too straight when he entered a room. The way board members paused to read his expression before speaking. The way waiters in five-star hotels moved like ghosts, avoiding eye contact. He remembered Abiba's eyes. Clear, firm, human. He missed them. 3 days after his return, Zayd called a meeting with the executive board of his private philanthropic foundation, a team of 12, most of whom were used to rubber-stamping donations in his name for PR purposes. They entered the conference room with tablets and rehearsed smiles. Zayd didn't smile back. I want to restructure the foundation, he said, straight to the point. There was silence. One of the older men adjusted his glasses. Sir, I'm not sure I follow. I want to reallocate 60% of our discretionary fund toward grassroots initiatives. Zayd said, micro-scholarship for women in East Africa, grant programs for undocumented students, literacy initiatives, the kind of work that changes one person's life, not headlines. The room shifted. Some eyebrows raised. One woman cleared her throat. With respect, Mr. Al-Hakim, this could attract scrutiny. These aren't vetted NGOs. Many of them are unstable, politically sensitive. Zayd leaned forward. Then let us be the ones who stabilize them. I don't want to be remembered for writing checks to museums. I want to leave something behind that breathes. The board fell quiet again. No one argued. No one dared. But he could sense their confusion. They didn't understand why this mattered to him. And he didn't explain. Because how do you explain the impact of being seen, truly seen, by someone who had nothing? That night, Zayd sat on the balcony of his penthouse, staring out at the marina. The city lights danced over the water like fragments of memory. In his hand was his phone. On the screen, Abiba Marone. He hadn't contacted her again since that evening outside Le Palais. She had taken the card, but she hadn't called. Still, he sent a message. The foundation has a new scholarship. It's yours if you want it. No strings, no expectations, just possibility. He put the phone down and waited. Hours passed. The moon shifted. Then a reply. Why me? Zayd stared at the screen. He typed slowly. Because your voice carried more truth than I've heard in a lifetime. And because the world needs more of that truth, not less. There was no immediate response. But that night he slept, deeply, without dreams, for the first time in years. A week later, the foundation office in Doha received an application from a young woman in Nairobi. A simple PDF. Clean, direct, no embellishments. Just her name, history, educational background, and a single paragraph at the end. I'm not asking to be saved. I'm asking for the same door that's already open to others. If I walk through it, it will be on my own feet. Zayd approved the scholarship personally. Abiba Marone was enrolled in a 2-year executive education program in Europe, fully funded. Housing, travel, living stipend. She didn't ask for special treatment. She didn't thank him in glowing terms. She simply replied, "Thank you. I'll do my part." Months passed. Zayd didn't hear from her again, but he followed her progress. She topped every module. Professors praised her written clarity. She never attended parties. She never asked for extensions. She volunteered at refugee clinics on weekends. She sent money home to Nairobi. Quiet, steady, focused. Zaid never wrote, never called, but she was always there, not in his inbox, but in his mind. She had become the measure. Each time he sat in a boardroom and someone asked if a decision would look good on paper, he thought of her. Each time he saw a servant ignored, a woman dismissed, a young mind undervalued, he remembered her letter, and without realizing it, his empire began to shift. Less vanity, more purpose. Less noise, more meaning. 2 years later, on a spring afternoon in Geneva, Zaid walked into a conference on ethical investment hosted by one of the world's leading business schools. He wasn't scheduled to speak. He came as a guest, a listener, but as he entered the main hall, a name on the schedule stopped him cold. Keynote, Abiba Marone, dignity and decision-making, the power of seeing the invisible. He sat in the third row. She walked onto the stage with quiet confidence, wearing a navy suit, hair pinned back. The audience fell silent. She spoke, clearly, powerfully, without notes. She talked about what it meant to be seen, what it meant to have the courage to speak, and how a single moment of defiance, not to fight, but to remind, could change everything. Zaid watched, unmoving. When she finished, the hall erupted in applause. She didn't scan the crowd. But somehow she knew, outside, under a blooming cherry blossom tree. They stood face to face again. "You came," she said. He nodded. "I listened." She smiled. And for a long moment, they said nothing more. They didn't need to. The storm had passed. The air between them was quiet, but it was full. Geneva bloomed that April. The city, always tidy and cold in Zaid's mind, now felt different, alive in a subtle way. The lake sparkled with the weightless calm of spring, and tulips lined the streets in orderly bursts of color. It wasn't the city that had changed. It was him. Zaid and Abiba walked slowly along the edge of the lake. They hadn't planned to. It just happened, as if the city itself offered a moment of peace before either of them had to name what they now were to each other. They didn't hold hands. They didn't flirt. They simply walked. "You were brilliant on stage," he said. "I told the truth," she answered. "You made it sound like an art." "I made it sound like a life," she replied, "because that's what it is." They paused near a bench under an elm tree. She sat, folding her hands in her lap, calm as always. Zaid remained standing, gazing out at the boats drifting across the lake. "I've followed your work," he said quietly. "I read every paper, every grant proposal you submitted. I even watched your TEDx talk. Twice." She didn't turn to him. "You're not subtle." "I didn't want to be." "Then why wait 2 years to show your face again?" Zaid took a breath. "Because I didn't want to take anything from you," he said. "Not your space, not your name, not your path." She looked up at him now, her eyes soft but discerning. "You were afraid I'd think you were trying to own my success." "I was afraid I might want to," he confessed. Abiba tilted her head. "That's honest." "I didn't want to be another man who offers help and then demands gratitude." "You weren't," she said. He turned toward her fully. "But I want to know you again, not as a moment in my memory, as a person." There was silence. Then she patted the bench beside her. Zaid sat. "Let me ask you something," she said. "Why did you really offer me that scholarship?" He opened his mouth to answer, something about respect, about her strength, but she raised her hand gently to stop him. "I mean, honestly," she clarified, "not the speech. The feeling." Zaid looked down at his hands, the cuff of his linen shirt twitching slightly in the breeze. "I think I saw in you a version of the man I wanted to be," he said. "When you stood in front of me that night and told me no, not with anger, but with grace, you didn't just speak truth. You were truth, and I wanted to be around that. I wanted to learn how to be that." Abiba watched him. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just absorbed the words. "I wanted to be seen like that," he added more quietly. "Not for my money, not for my reputation. just for being a man who was still capable of growing. A bird chirped in the elm above them. Abiba let her shoulders relax slightly. And now, Zaid turned to her. Now I don't want to need you for that. I want to share it with you. I want to sit across from someone who knows the world doesn't owe her anything and still builds anyway. Someone who reminds me, every day, that kindness is not weakness. She looked down. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You don't even know what I want. Then tell me. She didn't speak immediately. Then carefully she said, I want to build schools. Zaid blinked. Schools. In East Africa. For girls. For refugees. For children who never see books in their native language. I want to create systems of permanence, not Band-Aids. I want to create roots where governments plant gravel. Zaid let out a long breath. That's a beautiful dream. It's not a dream, she said. It's a blueprint. I've already started drafting it. He turned slightly toward her, legs angled. Do you need funding? She shook her head. Not from you. I need time, structure, advisors, accountability. I need someone to challenge me without trying to control me. You'd have that, he said softly. She looked at him then, not through him, not around him, but directly into his gaze. I might believe you, she said. Zaid nodded. Then let's talk about it. Everything. No promises. Just conversation. She stood. He followed. As they resumed their walk, she asked, Did you ever think you'd change this much? Zaid thought about that for a moment. I think I always wanted to, he said, but I didn't know what it would cost. And what did it cost? My certainty, he replied, but I got something better in return, which is perspective. She nodded slowly. That's a fair trade. They walked until the sun lowered behind the hills, casting the lake in amber and softening the lines of every building around them. Geneva exhaled in golden silence. That evening, they shared dinner at a quiet cafe. No cameras, no fanfare. They talked about the books they'd loved, the mistakes they'd made, and the people who shaped them. Zaid laughed more that night than he had in years. And Abiba listened more than she spoke, but when she did, her words landed like steady rain. Calm, nourishing, impossible to ignore. They didn't talk about the future. Not yet, but something had begun. Not a romance. Not a deal. A respect. A rhythm. Something rare. Something true. And in that quiet human space, far from empires, egos, or expectations, Zaid al-Hakim, the man who once demanded silence or look, found peace not in being followed, but in walking beside someone who could lead just as well. 1 year later, the ground broke on the first school. It was built in the red earth of northern Kenya, where most international donors never set foot, where aid rarely stayed long enough to build anything permanent. The children here didn't wear shoes. They carried buckets before books, but they smiled despite it all, wide, toothy, radiant. The school would be called the Morone Foundation Learning Center. Zaid had argued against naming it after her, but Abiba, quietly, had refused. She didn't want her name etched in marble or on golden plaques. But she understood something he didn't back then: the importance of legacy for those whose stories are often erased. This isn't for me, she told him. It's for the little girls who look like me and think power only lives in men's hands. Zaid hadn't responded to that. He had only nodded and made sure the builders got the name right. He visited the site often. In the beginning, quietly, always in the background, Abiba handled every decision, from materials to staff, from language curriculum to community hiring. She didn't just oversee the project. She wove herself into it. And Zaid watched her in awe. The man who once barked at a waitress now walked through fields with bare feet, sat with village elders in plastic chairs, and wrote checks not for press but for permanence. He no longer flew private, unless it was necessary. He wore fewer watches. He kept a copy of Abiba's original letter in his office, framed behind glass. She didn't know that. Not yet. One afternoon, under the shade of an acacia tree by the construction site, Zaid handed Abiba a folder. Inside, approval letters from 6 different international agencies, confirming match funding and strategic support for future Marone Foundation projects across Uganda, Somalia, and rural Morocco. She flipped through the pages, silent. When she looked up, her eyes glistened. Zaid didn't speak. He only touched her hand, not as a lover, not as a man seeking permission, but as a witness to her transformation and his own. That night, back in Nairobi, Abiba sat at the desk in her modest apartment. The sounds of the city curled through the window, distant drums, laughter, car horns. She lit a candle, and for the first time in a long time, she began to write for herself. Not a speech, not a proposal, a letter. She didn't address it, didn't even sign it, but every word came from a place she had never dared explore. I didn't know a man like him could change. I didn't believe it. Not really. Not at first. Power rewires people. It corrodes the parts of them that were once tender. I had seen it happen too many times. But Zaid surprised me. Not because he gave me a scholarship or money or recognition, but because he learned how to sit with discomfort, because he stopped demanding answers and started listening to silence. She paused. Her hand trembled. I don't love him. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way stories tell it. But I trust him now, and that feels more powerful. He gives me space, and presence, and stillness. That is more than I thought any man could give me. She folded the letter unsealed and tucked it inside her journal. She would never show it to him. That wasn't the point. The following week, the school opened. Hundreds attended. Elders gave speeches. Children sang. Government officials shook hands. But the most moving moment came when Abiba walked in front of the courtyard and raised a Kenyan and Ethiopian flag side by side. Then, without fanfare, called Zaid forward. The crowd applauded. He stepped up, nervous, not from fear, but from reverence. He wasn't used to being seen like this. Not as a savior, as a partner. Abiba didn't say anything dramatic. She simply said, "This is what happens when power listens. When a man builds with his hands instead of only with his name." Zaid bowed his head, and the applause rose again. Later that night, as they walked together through the village, Zaid asked her softly, "Do you believe me now?" She turned to him. "About what?" "That I never wanted to take anything from you. That I only wanted to give." Abiba smiled, not a soft smile, but one anchored in truth. "I believe you did take something," she said. "But it was something I didn't need anymore." He looked puzzled. "You took away my doubt," she continued. "That men like you could change." He stopped walking, and for a long moment he looked at her, not like a man falling in love, but like a man witnessing something sacred. "I don't deserve that," he whispered. "Maybe not," she said, "but you earned it." They sat on the front steps of the school. The stars so bright they looked like lanterns hanging from the sky. Zaid turned to her. "You never answered me." "About what?" "About love." Abiba didn't look away. "I don't think we need to love the way stories say we should," she replied. "Not all fireworks and promises. Sometimes love is showing up, every day, without claiming ownership, without demanding thanks." Zaid nodded slowly. "Then I'll keep showing up." And he did. Every month, every project, every conversation, no matter how uncomfortable. He showed up, not as a prince, not as a rescuer, but as a man who had been humbled, changed, and made whole by a single voice, a waitress who once refused to be made small. Together, they built 15 schools in 4 countries. They wrote a book on dignity and global leadership. They spoke at the UN. They were nominated for humanitarian awards. But none of that mattered as much as the simple truth neither of them ever said aloud. That one moment of courage in a restaurant over a glass of water had rewritten the course of 2 entire lives. Not through romance, through recognition. And in the end, that was more powerful than any empire.